The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Homelessness, hunger and abuse, struggling families, the developmentally disabled. The issues facing the Peninsula's neediest run the full gamut of seemingly intractable problems. We talked to 6 leaders of local nonprofits about the challenges they face and whether or not we need to rethink how we think about charity. The game is giving and the game is on. Even in good times, nonprofits struggle to raise funds to meet the needs of those they serve, a challenge that grows exponentially more difficult in hard times. Why do some social problems persist? Why can't homelessness or hunger be wiped out? And are we unfair to nonprofits? Do we expect them to succeed like a business, but operate as though they've taken a vow of poverty? We've assembled a team of executives from the Peninsula's most respected, most effective, and most important nonprofits to discuss the issues they face raising money, meeting the needs of those most in need, and trying to change the social dynamic they face. Joining us for this special edition of the game are Kitty Lopez, Executive Director of Samaritan House. For 30 years, Samaritan House has provided a broad range of services and resources to low-income residents in San Mateo County, including case management, clothing, medical care, food, shelter, employment assistance, and food and toys for the holidays. Katie, thank you for being... Kitty, jeez. Thanks for being here. Yeah, I knew this. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. Next, we have Andy Frisch, Executive Director of Kainos Home and Training Center. Kainos provides a wide variety of residential, vocational, and related services with the highest quality training and support to adults with developmental disabilities so that each individual may maximize his or her potential, become an active member of the community. Andy, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Mark.
Next, Kathy Jackson, CEO of Second Harvest Food Bank of Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. Second Harvest is dedicated to ending local hunger. Founded in 1974, Second Harvest is one of the largest food banks in the country, providing food to an average of nearly 250,000 people each month. Last year, the food bank provided the equivalent of 41 million meals to the community. Kathy, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Sara Larios Mitchell, CEO of StarVista. StarVista works to help children, young people, adults, and families build emotionally and mentally healthy lives through a wide range of counseling, prevention, early intervention, and education resources and services to more than 34,000, I can't read that number, 34,000 people throughout San Mateo County every year. You can tell we're very formal, Sarah. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Melissa Lukin, Executive Director of CORA, Community Overcoming Relationship Abuse. CORA provides safety, support, and healing for individuals who experience abuse in an intimate relationship and educates the community to break the cycle of domestic violence. It's the only organization on the Peninsula dedicated exclusively to serving victims and survivors of domestic violence and abuse. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, we have Karae, CEO of InnVision Shelter Network, which works to break the cycle of homelessness, providing homeless families and individuals the resources to return to self-sufficiency, including temporary and long-term shelter and counseling that moves their clients beyond the bed. Karae, thanks for joining us. Thank you all for being here. This is, I think, a good time to have this discussion. There's a lot going on. There's an interesting discussion going on within your own network, featuring a gentleman named Dan Pallotta, who started the AIDS Ride and the 3-day breast cancer walk, which collapsed, one might say, sort of famously, or at least infamously. And he did a TED Talk not too long ago and talked about how we think about nonprofits. I think it's a great way to start off this discussion. So, Jim, if you want to roll that tape now.
Terrific.
Our generation does not want its epitaph to read, "We kept charity overhead low." We wanted to read that we changed the world, and that part of the way we did that was by changing the way we think about these things. So the next time you're looking at a charity, don't ask about the rate of their overhead. Ask about the scale of their dreams. their Apple, Google, Amazon scale dreams, how they measure their progress toward those dreams, and what resources they need to make them come true, regardless of what the overhead is. Who cares what the overhead is if these problems are actually getting solved? If we can have that kind of generosity, a generosity of thought, then the nonprofit sector can play a massive role in changing the world for all those citizens most desperately in need of it to change.
That's a great prompt, I suppose. It raises an interesting question, because my guess is when you get a major donation, and maybe even the smaller ones, the very first question they want to know is, how much of the dollar I'm giving you is going to the people I'm trying to help, and how much is going into, to put it crassly, your pockets? Kitty, is that a problem, and is there too much emphasis placed on overhead for running these charities?
You know, as Dan was speaking, I think we were all nodding that yes, that's true. I think some donors, some foundations really understand that it takes people and resources to do the work that we're doing. But there is a greater emphasis on that. And I think all of us, I mean, certainly Samaritan House tries to keep those costs down and the administrative overhead. But I think people forget it takes people to handle a lot of these complex problems. They're not just solved easily. So, you know, I think we all do what we can to explain it to people, to explain it to donors, what we're doing with the money. But if we didn't have to worry about it, I think we could do a lot more.
Well, that's really, he said, who cares about overhead?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is most of your donors do, but should we just decide we're not going to worry about overhead? Sarah?
Well, I think it'd be really liberating. I know when I was watching that clip, I felt liberated and inspired thinking of what we could all accomplish if we weren't burdened with worrying about our overhead. I mean, I think we've been really successful, all of us here, because we've been able to support our teams internally, meaning accounting, our finance, development departments, and so on. But I think there's a way that we're sometimes held back by thinking about really being so careful with trying to make a big difference in the community. I think we all want to make a profound difference in the communities.
Who else wants to chime in?
It sort of speaks to the dual bottom line that we have, you know, where we need to be about efficiencies and we also need to be about social impact. And, you know, I'm reminded of that example when you go to buy a latte. You know, you don't say, I just want to pay for the coffee. You know, you don't say, I don't want to pay for the cup or for the overhead that it costs to go into it. I mean, just that whole model seems to be
well, but we
misdirected.
expect, when we go buy a cup of coffee, we expect that to be part of the cost. And yet there seems to be a different set of expectations for nonprofits, Karae.
Well, you can align it with business, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit. So businesses have to worry about their overhead. And there are metrics that are looked at in the annual report, and they're very well laid out. But the software industry has a different overhead than the car manufacturing industry. And so I think that because those metrics are there and people understand that, they feel more comfortable of what that legacy is. But what is the overhead for homeless shelters? What is the overhead for Kathy? Of, you know, transporting food to those who are in need and poverty. We don't know what those are, so the lack of comfort for the donors, I think, also makes them be conservative.
When you say we don't know, you mean the general public.
The general public doesn't know. Well, we have a standard that we all adhere to, which is 20%, but I don't know if that's the right number. So I think we should watch our overhead. The question is, what's the right number, what's the right threshold, and what's the narrative or the context around that, you know?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that smart donors really focus on impact. They want to know who is benefiting and to what degree are they benefiting, and how are you measuring that? How are you measuring your progress? I think it's fair for donors to look to the charities they support to be efficient, but I think it's a more nuanced assessment than just what's the percentage of your overhead. Right. We can reduce our overhead if we hire less educated, less experienced, less trained people. But I don't think anybody would argue that we would have more impact if we did that.
But let's flip that on his head, because one of the things he was talking about in this TED Talk was, what if the donation you get is used to parlay it into a tenfold increase, so you spend more money getting money, but you get more money? wouldn't that be having impact? I mean, that's kind of the question he's really trying to raise, isn't it, Andy? The idea that businesses spend a lot of money to make more money. Mm-hmm. It's a business model. You don't, you don't, if you're in a consumer product, and in many ways you guys are in the consumer business, you don't make money, you don't get more profit, you don't get more resources if you don't
can't grow your customer base.
And if you don't let people know you're out there. In other words, what would happen if you doubled or tripled your marketing budget?
We could expand our services, we could impact many more people. And I think that's part of the question that's being asked is, how can we change the metric? Efficiency is an important metric. And I think all of us feel that, and all of us try and be efficient. But it becomes the only metric for a nonprofit organization. And we need to move that bar and say, the metric is, are we reducing hunger? Are we helping people live more independent, more safe lives? Are we providing shelter and reducing homelessness? Those are the metrics. And to say, really, that's important, but more important is, are you staying below 20% is crazy. You're looking for the final for, as nonprofits, we're supposed to be changing society. That's what you want to measure us on, not by did you hit 19 or 21%. It's a silly arbitrary number, and I think that's what's important about that clip is forget about that. Focus on the metrics that matter. Have we reduced homelessness? Can we impact hunger? Can we make the differences in children's lives and people with disabilities' lives? That's, to me, the real metrics.
But I think it takes constant education of the community and of donors. I mean, I swear, I think some former donor thinks I'm working for free because I love people and I want to help people. I still think there's a mentality that is that if you are in this sector, you should be of a different kind and be willing to sacrifice for the cause. And I think we all do, but it's going to require, in order for the cause to move forward, we're all going to have to sacrifice and participate.
Well, and the fact is, and if you want to start applying a private business model, given the credentials you have, the experience you all have, this is over 100 years of experience in nonprofit sitting here. You should be making a heck of a lot more money. I suspect you won't argue with me about that. On the other hand, it's not something that probably your donors are comfortable with, the idea that you'd be making a salary that was competitive with the private sector. And so when we get back to the question I asked Andy, if you doubled or tripled your marketing budget, yeah, I could see where it would provide a lot more opportunities, but what would your donor base do?
Well, we need to get them to think about investing.
Would they rebel?
Are they investing with a marketing spend? If they think of it as an investment, they would absolutely do that. So it's that education that Katie mentioned, is can we get our donors to understand the investment that we're making, whether it's in people, whether it's in marketing, it's an investment towards ending homelessness or ending domestic violence or feeding people, ending hunger. So people love investments, but how do we show that back to them? And that's the next
return on investment.
Return on investment.
And so how do you measure that?
Well, and that takes time. I mean, he even says in that clip, Amazon had 6 years. I mean, I think we all I have instances where we've helped an individual or a family. We all could say that. I think when donors and foundations give, they want a broader impact, and it's not solving the problem, but again, these are complex social issues that people have. Any one of us may have had family members who had same problems, and we have access. So it's again that constant education of people and getting them to help us have a greater impact. I mean, I've had people say, or donors wonder about our marketing tools. Are they too good? Are they too slick looking? As if we should be paying attention to that or worrying about that.
Or the donor who says, I don't want any of my money to go to overhead. Where's the overhead going to come from if it's not coming from that donor? It makes no sense. But there is that underlying mentality that the important issues that we're dealing with can be solved on the cheap. And I think that's one of the reasons that they're not solved. And it's not the nonprofits, it's, to me, society in general. If you want to solve homelessness, if you want to solve hunger, if you want to make a real difference in children's lives, it's going to take an investment larger than the current investment. And it's our job to figure out how to grow that.
What is overhead? I mean, since you try to keep it under 20%, what are you spending the money on?
Well, we're spending a lot of our money, of course, in our locations. So we have a lot of sites throughout San Mateo County, and we always try to find the places that are least expensive, and that tends to be in the rougher parts of neighborhoods, unfortunately. But it also covers our staff, the back door kind of facilities, administration. It covers a lot of those sorts of costs. But one of the other things that I really wanted to state is we want to invest even more in our staff and give them a really good living wage. You know, it seems really wrong to have staff who are making a living but barely getting by in some instances. And
is there some overlap between staff and clients sometimes?
Yes, yes. Unfortunately, there is. There is.
Yeah.
And that's really painful as a CEO of a large organization to say this is as much as we can pay. So I think we want to attract even, you know, brighter, smarter people, educated people who are visionaries and who can lead the charge in the future.
And we need the donors who are willing to step up and actually help with the fundraising, because the paradox is the demand on us to try to do that from the staffing perspective solely, and that's really virtually not sufficient. And when our salaries are what they are, it really seems to beg the question as to whether that's really a feasible model. I remember the Compass Point nonprofit survey that came out several years ago. The #1 reason that executive directors leave their jobs is because of this fundraising aspect, the stress related to it. And yet I've had a lovely experience with many donors that, as you say, Kathy, that once they understand the strategy and they understand what it is that you're trying to do, they really can get on board. Yeah.
And don't you wish that you would sit down with more donors who would say, tell us your Google-sized dreams. Right. Yeah. What is your vision? Yes. Where are you trying to get to? And by the way, how much would that cost?
Yes. Right.
That would be a fantastic dialogue to have. I don't know about you guys, we don't have it as often as we would like to, although more often than you might suspect.
Well, hold that thought, because I want to come back to it. We're going to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Lisa Roundtree, Vice President of Human Resources with San Mateo Credit Union. I've been a longtime supporter of Peninsula Television as an individual and as a part of my organization. I'd like to invite you to support Penn TV too. Penn TV has been an important and independent community resource in San Mateo County since 1999 and continues to bring informative and entertaining programming to our community. To make a contribution to Penn TV, please visit their website at www.penntv.tv and click on the Donate tab. Penn TV is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization, so all donations are tax deductible. Thanks very much and enjoy your favorite Penn TV shows.
Hey, did you know that Peninsula TV is available to over 230,000 households in San Mateo County?
And then there's the internet. We stream all of our programming on our website, penntv.tv.
Our website has everything you need to know about what's going on in San Mateo County.
From kids to healthcare, from sports to business, from politics to lifestyles.
Peninsula Television, your independent source for news, information, and entertainment since 1999.
To the game, we are talking to 6 executives from major nonprofits here on the peninsula. Kitty Lopez from Samaritan House, Andy Frisch with Kainos Home and Training Center, Kathy Jackson with Second Harvest Food Banks, Sarah Mitchell, and I knew I couldn't do this from memory, I'm sorry.
With StarVista.
StarVista, you know, see, you just changed your name, that's what threw me off. Melissa Lukin from InnVision, Shelter Network, and Karae. Lyle?
Good job.
And I've forgotten, I'm sorry.
I'm with InnVision Shelter Network.
Oh, shoot, I got them mixed up. See, I should not try to do this from memory. What I do remember is we were talking about fundraising and nonprofits and overhead, and how much of your time is spent simply having to raise money. And how much would you like someone to come in and relieve you of that burden by, you know, tripling your foundation or your endowment? I mean, how much time do you actually have to spend?
50%.
50%.
At least 50%.
I really love it, though. I love talking about what we do. I love saying this is what InnVision Shelter Network is focused on. I love letting people know that in Silicon Valley, that we have thousands of homeless people, because I think it's a lack of awareness.
Right.
And that also leads to educating people about what is going on in their community. And if they want to do good in the community, where's an area that they could align with? So I'm one of the few who enjoy fundraising, and I like to ask. I love to ask.
How do you ask? What's the ask?
There's two sides to fundraising. There's the education side of it, and I think we all enjoy that. Yep. There's the ask side of it. I'm a little bit more stressed with that. But then there's the stress that each of us feel to make our bottom line. And there is a real pressure that if we've got clients and we've got staff that rely on us making our number, and if we don't make our number for a significant period of time, there's going to be impacts for the people we serve and for the staff that we support. And I think the stress of that.
It almost sounds like you're living hand to mouth. I mean, are you at any point sort of in danger that if you don't hit your fundraising goal, you're facing cutbacks? Are you facing going out of business? I mean, what happens if, 50% of your time is spent fundraising, which tells me that if you went down to 40, you might run into real financial problems.
I think absolutely that all of us rely on fundraising, and if we did not have community support, we would each have to change the way we do business. And there's something that makes sense about that with nonprofit organizations. We are resources of the community. But again, back to the first point, to put a restriction on nonprofits to say, limit the amount of time that you're having on overhead, limit your reserves, operate as lean as possible, and then be here when the economy tanks and donations are twice as difficult to get, ramp up your services to be twice as effective and serve twice as many people. There's a little bit too much of a challenge with some of those putting those contrasting constraints on us.
I think it depends on the source too. You know, most institutional giving is extremely restricted. So, you know, the balance for us is how do we get those general operating funds, in our case anyway, and I know that for many of us, we share this challenge of how to communicate to the community essentially what Dan's talking about.
You get institutional funds which come from, what, corporations mostly? Or
no, mostly foundations.
From foundations that are set up to address the issues you're addressing.
Government contracts.
And they spend, you know, and they specify, especially the government money, probably has to be really specific about how you spend it. How much do you, of your budget do you raise from individuals, from just straightforward donors, the kinds of people that Andy may have a little trouble closing the deal with?
Well, I think that varies depending on the organization. For Samaritan House, it's 60 to 70% is from individuals and foundations. And so 40% is government. So I think the big push is getting major gifts and donors, but you know, we're all kind of competing for those dollars. We try to do it nicely and try to collaborate when we can to have a greater impact, but it gets more and more challenging every year. I mean, we have a reserve. I'm happy about that. I haven't had to lay off very many people, maybe a couple in a particular program, but it gets more and more challenging every year.
Yeah, we raise at Second Harvest, more than 90% of our funds come from, first and foremost, individuals, corporations, and foundations. So we get very little government funding. I think that used to feel like a really dangerous funding model. Now it feels like a safer funding model. Just demonstrating it's better to be lucky than good at times. But the thing that's interesting to me about nonprofit, and I came to nonprofit, as I know Karae did, from a lot of years in the for-profit area, is that on the first day of your fiscal year, it's like the clock resets and you're back to zero because you have got to go do it all over again and raise the funds. And we do worry about the fundraising. I think even if you're really well managed, you're careful with your funding, you establish reserves, when you come up short, you have to cut services or you cut people, which ultimately means the same thing.
Well, in the case of Second Harvest, though, what you're best known for are your canned food drives and donations of food. How much of that, I mean, first of all, I would imagine that's personnel-wise, it's an intensive activity. But second of all, how do you factor that in? Does that count as an individual donation? I mean, and how much do you get of what you provide to people? How much comes from those food drives?
A lot comes from the food drives, and more importantly, a lot of variety comes from the food drives, and it helps make the food that we distribute so much more responsive to people's needs. We are very fortunate in that we work with every single one of the folks on this panel, and we could not do what we do without them, because we would be nothing but a warehouse full of food if we did not have 300, we call them our partner agencies, because you guys are our partners. Without you, we could not get the food out to the people who desperately need it.
And building on partnerships, if I could, I think that's one of the trends I'm seeing with donors, is they ask, well, who do you partner with? You know, if you got food from Second Harvest Food Bank, that would be great. And then you explain, well, we've been doing that for 25 years. And they're really happy to hear that. And yes, we have people that are experiencing domestic violence that CORA refers over to us. Once it's a safe environment, we can take them in our shelter. Really? So again, back to the education and letting donors in the private sector know that, golly, there's some really savvy and clever things going on in nonprofit, that you don't have to push so hard on our overhead. We really are quite effective at building partnerships and leveraging different kinds of skills and services in the industry. And I love talking about that as well. I think that's powerful.
To get back to Dan Pilato's point, though, the expectation is that the dollar invested in your organizations is going to go as far as is humanly possible to delivering services, versus the private model, which is you can chew up some dollars for a while because the return ultimately is going to be meaningful as a profit. How do you sell that fundraising investment? How do you sell the idea of a return on investment? What do you tell people?
Well, I think what really resonates with people is the story of impact. And I think everyone here has been talking and touching on the story of impact. And what is the story? What is the narrative? When people know what the goal is, what the vision is, who it is that we're reaching out to, I think people feel inspired and excited. I think what you were talking about earlier really clicked with me, in that there's this huge disconnect, unfortunately, in our county around the haves and the have-nots. And it's getting wider. And I think there's a way that people aren't fully aware of how much people are actually still suffering. We're coming out of this great recession, and it's been really painful and really hard for a lot of people. And we know a lot of people who are giving money, they're sending that overseas, they're sending it out of the county. There's a lack of awareness. As wonderful as we all are in trying to message what's actually happening here, there's a sense of, oh, things are okay, and I'm making my mortgage payment and my kids are going to nice school, but there's a lot of people who are still really struggling. And I think that's part of the gap that we're all trying to bridge, is letting people know, like, no, actually there's still a lot of people in a lot of pain here in this county.
I think, Mark, I was just going to say, I think the best way is to get people out to see what you do. And I love doing, Karae talked about really enjoying that in your job. I loved it. Come out and see what happens at the medical clinic, or come out and see the food pantry and walk them through and tell them some stories and tell them what you're trying to do and get them excited. I mean, people want to feel they're investing in something they're interested in and excited about, and that we're trying to make some headway. That's the best way to do it.
Do you think there's a lack of understanding of where your dollar goes? I mean, in the case of all 6 charities, we're talking about a delivery of service at a very personal, intensive level. I mean, each case, domestic abuse is a great example, or shelter, or any of those things, where it really requires someone to sit down with someone, understand their problems, and lay out for them how they're going to be able to solve them. And it's not going to be the same for everybody. So when we talk about overhead, when we talk about where the dollar goes, it seems to me a lot of it goes into really intensive personal interaction between you and your clients.
Yes. Well, building on Kitty's point, when trauma happens to your family, you become acutely aware of the person who's serving your mother or your sister. And so once someone's had a personal experience where a loved one has been in one of our shelters, they really want us to have college graduates caring for their mother or their sister. So coming out and visiting, and I do find that people here in Silicon Valley are very intellectual, and they want to solve big problems. And so I find that if you can get them to take the time, which is the struggle because they're all so busy, get them to come out and visit what you do and see someone else's mother or sister. We have all generations in our shelters, and people are very touched by that and touched by the case managers and the food pantry that is there on site to say, oh, Second Harvest Food Bank feeds homeless people at our shelter.
Is it a mistake to think my donation is going to solve a big problem? I mean, it seems to me an awful lot of what you guys do is solving what may, to outsiders, look like small problems, one problem at a time.
Well, and I think maybe that's where people might get frustrated with, oh, well, there's still the homeless, there's still hunger. And again, it's trying to work with the community and donors to see, yes, we know that, and my end goal is to put me out of a job. But if I can have impact with this one family or these 3 people, that's something in our community.
We network, as Kathy said, all closely together, but ultimately to solve the larger problem, it's not focusing on, the metrics you're talking about in terms of overhead. It's about us working with business and government to address these larger issues. As even if we didn't focus on at all fundraising, we can't solve homelessness and the critical imbalance between the haves and the have-nots in our community, just as nonprofits. That's why we're working, all of us, with business, with local leaders, because these are regional issues. These aren't issues that can just be tackled by one nonprofit as large as it got. If we got to be a Google nonprofit, these are issues that need to be dealt by government leaders, but by Peninsula TV and by the community at large.
On that note, we're going to take another break. You all stick around, and you stay with us too. It's interesting, you know.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Check out the Peninsula TV studio with over 2,000 square feet of space in the auditorium of the Samtrans building in San Carlos. One studio, many looks. From a simple talk show to an onstage production, from musical performances to business webcasts, PowerPoint presentations, Skype interviews. With our state-of-the-art control room, we're one mouse click away from going live from our studio to the internet or to Peninsula TV. For more information, call 650-637-1936 or use the Contact Us form at pentv.tv.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon, and we're joined, I'm going to read it this time so I don't goof it up, by Kitty Lopez, Executive Director of Samaritan House, Andy Frisch, Executive Director of Kainos Home and Training Center, Kathy Jackson, CEO of Second Harvest Food Bank, Sara Larios Mitchell, CEO of StarVista.
Thank you.
Melissa Lukin, Executive Director of CORA, Community Overcoming Relationship Abuse, and Karae Lisle, CEO of InnVision Shelter Network. We were talking about where does the dollar go, and I want to lead into the sort of the theme of the opening clip that we use, which is, do we need to rethink nonprofits? Dan Pilati in the clip we showed was talking about Google dreams, dream big, and it's fine to dream big when somebody's investing money and expects to get rich off of it. But we're talking about big problems that you're dealing with. Sometimes it must feel like you're shoveling against the tide. Is that a realistic expectation by Dan Pilati that that nonprofits should think big, should think, I'm going to wipe out homelessness, I'm going to work myself out of a job, and I'm going to spend money and raise money to do that? Is that a realistic expectation?
The problems are that we all work on every day are very intertwined. So homelessness is a symptom of poverty. Yeah. Hunger is a symptom of poverty. So we can't on our own end homelessness or hunger, but we can work within the community to serve those people who are struggling and hope that they don't repeat, and then work on longer term problems together. Education is a great step forward to any element of poverty. So all of us have small education initiatives that we work on, that when we get our children in, we want to get those kids not to repeat poverty or homelessness or domestic violence.
And at the root of all of that, as obvious as it is, we don't often talk about classism and racism and sexism and sort of the fundamental beliefs that promote the problems in the first place. I'm reminded of Peter Hero used to talk about the way that nonprofits think about ourselves, though. And I think there's something there as well that is important for us. We're the only sector that defines ourselves by what we're not. That we are public benefit corporations, that we're not just nonprofits. And I think that somehow there's a sort of ethos in there that needs to be adjusted to for us.
I think that economics, I mean, that's what keeps people oftentimes in the situations that they're in. They need better jobs, they need more money, they need more education. There was that index of Silicon Valley that was put out recently, and they showed that growing kind of disparity between people who have the jobs in tech company and this ethnic population that is growing and emerging. We need some angel investors for the nonprofit sector. It happens in the business sector to fund or to have more partnerships with businesses so that they can help train this population, this sector of our society, so they can try to get ahead. But who's going to do that? Because it's going to affect people's bottom line, and they're not willing to do that. We need some angel investors for the nonprofit community.
And it sounds like you're not doing that now. You're not really. You can do some education counseling. You can even put them on a track to improve their education. But it doesn't sound like you're in a position to really transform the lives of these people economically, so much as you try to put them in the position of being able to do so.
I think there's actually pressures in the nonprofit space not to think that broadly, because you can be accused of mission creep if you do, right? So if you start thinking about the entire person and poverty and all the different elements that come together, we sometimes say at Second Harvest, hunger is complicated. Feeding a neighbor in need is not, which is really a way of saying we're very clear on what our mission is. And you saw what I did. We're very clear on what our mission is. It's providing food to people in need. But the fact of the matter is that while hunger may be an underpinning, you can't learn when you're hungry. It's hard to even look for a job or do a job when you're hungry. But all the other issues that the folks here are addressing are part and parcel of it as well. Right.
And there are academic trends on social innovation, and we're seeing more of the MBA programs at Stanford and Harvard now have tracks for social enterprise and social innovation. And that's the mixture or the overlap of nonprofit and private sector, where you run half of your business like a nonprofit and the other half can actually make business, I'm simplifying, can make profit. But those new models, I think, are innovating the nonprofit. So, you know, one of the questions was, should we rethink nonprofits? I think academically you're seeing that come up as they're using different models of how to raise money, how to spend money, and how to account for it. And that, at the root of it, is kind of what we're talking about today, is how we account for our
I want to go to something Melissa said in the context of what Kathy said, which she talked about the larger social issues of sexism and racism and classism and the economic strata. You know, a lot of people I know are worried that the peninsula is becoming an economic enclave where there's either very wealthy and there's a very poor group of people who serve the wealthy, and the middle class is disappearing. But don't you run the risk then of people seeing you in a political context, that they begin to think of you as an advocacy organization and not a nonprofit? And doesn't that run the risk of turning off some people? I mean, Dan Pilato was very much an advocate. He was an activist. He wasn't just running a nonprofit. He was trying to wipe out a problem for a community in this country for homosexuals, in which a lot of people would see him through a political prism. Isn't that one of the risks you run when you stray from your narrow focus?
We have tripped over that in the past. I have to say, I think we've evolved. I'm glad to say, over the last decade at least.
You mean you've gotten better at not letting people know what you're doing? Or?
Perhaps, in some regards. You know, we thought about, well, are we a feminist organization? Well, let's stay away from that. Let's just focus on the stigma of domestic violence. But I think you're right. There is potentially, at least it might cast potentially a different board makeup, if you will, if we start to talk that way.
One of the things that strikes me about the work you do at CORA is you're dealing with a lot of people who must feel trapped. And I wonder, is that the case with an awful lot of your clients, that they are they recognize they're trapped and that they don't know how to get out of the cycle they're in?
Well, how does a single mother find a job with no child care? And yet, if you can't go out and get a job, then how will you ever provide for your child? It is a loop and there is a trap there. But again, getting back to the partnerships, Peninsula 5 runs our child care center at no charge. So when people live in an InnVision Shelter Network facility, their child care, you know, is paid for, so that we can break that trap. And I think that's key too, is the entitlement that we hear people talk about politically. Entitlements are bad. Entitlements are great for short periods of time to bridge you back to self-sufficiency. If a mother can go and put her child in childcare and know the child is safe and go get a job and save money for 6 months, now they have $1,500 in the bank. That is a lot of money to a single mother. And now she can move into an apartment, start to feed herself, and start to pay her rent. And now she's a taxpayer.
It's interesting to me how you've adopted the word entitlement, because that's talking about politically charged words.
And yet, there are people in our community who have a disability. They are seniors on a fixed income. They will never suddenly just start getting a job and making a lot more money. And if we're going to be a compassionate, caring community, we have to be able to help those people and provide for them. I mean, my board members always say, I'm happy that we have these organizations in our county. I mean, what would we do without them?
Yeah. Go ahead, Andy.
Around the table today are representatives of the service providers. The nonprofit sector is larger than that and includes usually the smaller organizations that are playing an advocacy role. And most of us, if not all of us, are involved with them at other levels too. So I think it's not an either or. We are service providers for the most part that need to give voice to the issues that we're talking about. There's also people doing grassroots work. I'm involved with a number of organizations that are trying to break down the barriers of stigma with disability, that are trying to build more inclusive societies. That's advocacy work, that's grassroots work. That's another key component of nonprofits. And to talk about return of investment, there your overhead is everything. You can't do anything. You're not delivering food, you're not delivering services to people. You're just trying to change societies and individuals' hearts and minds so we can all be more effective at our work. And that's a key component, I think, of the nonprofit sector.
The idea of rethinking nonprofits. Should nonprofits be run like a business? That includes the ability to spend a lot of money before you show something. I mean, should you be out spending a lot of money on development, on developing your fundraising base, on marketing, not just your services, because you have a community you reach out to tell them you're available to them, and that's an important part of your mission. But those people who don't know, who should know, and who should be giving. I mean, we talked about the amount of time you all spend on fundraising. What if you ran like a business and you were spending a lot of time and money on development, on marketing?
Well, we're looking actually to expanding our development department, and we've been getting a lot of encouragement, which surprised some of us, to actually expand what we do within development and really trying to reach out more to private donors. Because I think there are a lot of people out there who want to make a difference and want to feel like they're part of a broader community that's changing San Mateo County. It's just a question of reaching out to them and letting them know, like, this is what we're trying to transform. I think so much of what people need right now is that sense of hope. I was thinking of what you were talking about, people feeling trapped, feeling like there's nowhere for them to go. It's really about giving them that sense of hope and looking for those strengths within them and letting them know, like, hey, there is this fantastic resource. You can go to Second Harvest. You can go, you can connect to all these different organizations and connect with people who have resources and can say, look, we can make this together.
We're talking, go ahead, Kathy.
I was going to say, I also think that operating like a business goes to a lot more than just how much time you spend on fundraising. Operating like a business means that you innovate. It means that you are willing to test out different service delivery models. We, last year at Second Harvest, were working to find new ways to distribute fresh produce. That's a wonderful gift to the community, and it's an operational nightmare. It's so much easier to deal with cans than it is with fresh fruits and vegetables. So we started pioneering these farmers markets for agencies. And Andy and Kitty and your organizations both participated, and you know that it took us a while to get it right. We kind of tried this location and that didn't work. We tried a different location. We shifted hours. We advertised it to the agencies in different ways. It took a while to come up with something that actually was more efficient for us and resulted in a wider variety of fresh fruits and vegetables, fresher produce, and more of it to the people who desperately needed it. So I think when you talk about acting more like a business, yes, absolutely, but I think that we do that, but we do it small scale. We do it, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
We're not acting like businesses, we are.
Yeah.
We are businesses right now.
And the return on investment is intangible. If you give money to one of our charities, then you know that your neighbors are not hungry, you know that your neighbors are not living in cars, and that people are taken care of. And that it's an intangible, but it is a return on investment. And that's what we're hoping that people will learn how to think.
Andy, hold your thought. We're going to take another break. We'll come right back to you, and we'll come back to you in just a minute. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Katie Roletto, and I'm a local professional media producer. Thanks to Penn TV's volunteer program, I was able to expand upon my experience and gain some amazing training in the areas of television production right here in the Bay Area. The staff at Penn TV is very skilled and experienced in all aspects of technical production and really helped me learn and grow. If you're interested in finding out more about Penn TV's volunteer program, please visit them at www.penntv.tv and click on the volunteer tab. Thanks, Penn TV.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. These conversations just keep going on, whether you're here or not. We're talking to 6 CEOs, executive directors of the Peninsula's most important nonprofits, and yes, that is an editorial point of view, but we're joined by Kitty Lopez, executive director of Samaritan House, Andy Frisch, executive director of Kainos Home and Training Center, Kathy Jackson, CEO of Second Harvest, Dr. Sara Larios Mitchell, CEO of StarVista, Melissa Lukin, executive director of CORA, and Karae Lisle, CEO of InnVision Shelter Network. And Andy, we were talking about running like a business, and I don't know if Dan Pallotta means run efficiently like a business, because I think that's the pressure you're under. But think big. Go ahead and spend 40% on developing funds, not 20%. Spend 40% on overhead and really hit these problems in a big way. That was his model for the AIDS ride.
And what he accomplished was incredible, and there's a very, very valuable point there. If we had more resources, we could solve many more, we could attack our problems with greater vigor and have greater results and impact more people's lives. And I think that's very, very important. At the same time, what I want to do is move the bar away from looking at the dollar as our measure at all. If you go back to what you were saying before, the food bank, is a partner of ours. They support us. We get food from the food bank, and then we can deliver it to people in need. There is not a more efficient organization out there than the food bank that can get that food out so quickly. And so when you look at the metrics, it's about it's not about the raises. Ultimately, I think it is about what we can pay our people, because there is a real challenge there. And Sara mentioned it to begin with. The government mandate some of our rates, and in some of the rates that they tell us to pay, they're factoring in that we're paying our people in Silicon Valley minimum wage. That's criminal. They should all be getting food at the food bank, and they probably would qualify. But the metrics that we should be talking about are, how can we inspire the community to make a difference in the causes that are important to all of us? And how are we doing it effectively? How are we doing it efficiently? And how are we tackling the issues that we state that we want to tackle? How we measure us against that. Don't measure us about 19 or 21%. If Sara can raise more money by investing in a larger development department, the point is, look at the children and the families that are impacted. Look at the difference that StarVista is making for people in the community. That's what we should be talking about. Not about is it 10%, is it 20%, or what would happen if it doubles. The Google dreams are, how can we tackle these really important problems?
You're dealing with people who give and who are giving, and why do people give? What's your pitch? How do you make people give you money?
I think people want to give. Yeah. I think that this community is very, very generous. I think they're not always aware. If you go to downtown Menlo Park or Palo Alto, today you will stand in line at a restaurant, right? There is no lack of no economic downturn. And so unless you see a homeless person that looks hungry, that has either a child or an animal with them, you're not reminded. What do we look at all day? Innovation, IPOs, who's got the latest mobile app. So I think people want to give. I think they have to be reminded that there are those people in their community that are serving them, that are working in the hospitality industry for minimum wage, and you see older cities like in New York, right? Where they have a lot of low-income housing because they know there's a large service sector and they appreciate the people that serve. I think we have a little work to do on that in Silicon Valley, where we need more affordable housing so that the people that work in the service sector can live close by to their jobs. They don't have to travel for 3 hours to get here because they live down in Gilroy, that they can afford to live close to their jobs like we do. So I do think people want to give. I think we need to raise the awareness. So that gets back to my fundraising delight, is I love to talk to people about the awareness.
We have people's ear. If we can get people to any of our organizations, we win a donor, and we win a long-term donor. But it's very difficult in this very hectic community in a very hectic time to keep that attention. And the press really doesn't help us very much. The press wants to quickly deal with a soundbite and move on to the next thing. And these issues don't go away overnight.
I find that we have to focus on the successes and what they can help contribute to in the way of successes, and stay away from the need, which is a challenge because the need is so loud and so dramatic. But I guess the statistics don't seem to have changed. That the middle class is the one that gives the highest percentage of their income, and I always find that's the piece that I'd like to kind of shake a little bit.
I brought this because I knew I wouldn't be able to remember it. But there is this table in one of the Nonprofit Quarterly. I don't know if any of you saw this, whereas George Washington University study, taxpayers that make incomes of $1 million or more give the least amount of money to basic needs. It's 3.8%. And arts, education, it's up in the 20.
It's interesting because I have met business executives who think their company is their contribution to the society they live in because they think they're making jobs, and they overlook what infrastructure maybe is holding them up. But that leads to a good question, which is that Silicon Valley has long had a reputation as a community of wealth for not giving, for giving below what you would expect and what you see in other communities around the country where there's a similar concentration of wealth. Why do you think that is?
I'll just say I can't speak to the comparability, but what I can speak to is honestly the exact opposite of that. We have had incredible support from Silicon Valley companies, from the people that work with those for those companies, from their foundations, and that's the flip side of what gets you down every day. That gets me up every day. And they don't just give dollars; they give food. They give of their time, which may be the thing they have the least of. They give of their expertise. They give of their own products. We had a company give us a building, for goodness sakes. So
I know we were all jealous of that.
Okay. but when we were thrilled. But we have seen an incredible amount of generosity, and we could not be providing the service that we are if we weren't the recipients of that.
Building on that, InnVision Shelter Network has 18,000 volunteers every year, and they help in our garden. They help with resume building, job skills, interviewing skills. They read to children. They help mothers learn how to cook more nutritiously, which is very difficult when your money is tight. Thank you for the produce. We really appreciate that. So I agree. I find that the community is very, very generous, again, with the awareness of just knowing that the problems are there and being able to connect. People connect to different problems based on their family of origin or their personal experience. But I find that most of my colleagues out of the tech sector, where I come from, all give. Maybe not as traditionally, it's not a long time family of giving, but we have a lot of new wealth in Silicon Valley as well.
We talked in the opening of the show, I should say I did, about intractable problems, and Dan Pilata talked about that too. Why haven't we solved, for the amount of money that does go into nonprofits, why aren't these problems going away, Sarah?
Well, I think we have this continual influx of people who are drawn to the Bay Area, who are drawn to the Peninsula, whether they're immigrants or people from other parts of the country. And they're struggling with lack of education, lack of resources. I mean, there are problems that I think are always going to persist. And I think part of the strategy that many of us use is trying to intervene at a very early stage to try to prevent them from the long term when it becomes really expensive on emotional, psychological, economic kind of level. So I think it's partly just having people coming here and coming with challenges. But I think they're coming here because they're feeling hopeful. Right. And it seems like it's a bright place, and they hear about the network that exists here of our kind of organizations working and collaborating together. And so there's a sense of, go west, go west.
Well, there is a long tradition in California of people coming here to reinvent themselves. Yeah. Right. Even starting by making up new names and careers for themselves. But let me talk real quickly, because we are actually coming to the end of our hour, we talked about the tough economic downturn. I've always wondered how you resolve those, because I would assume demand goes up, donations go down, and survival becomes a real issue, not just for you, but for your clients. How did you get through these times? Was it just basically one day at a time and hanging on as long as you could, or what happened? How did this work for you?
Our donations went up.
That's great, wow.
We found that people remarked to us that they had to cut back, but they believed in safety net services. We were very, very fortunate. The average gift size went up, so we were able to maintain, while we did lose some donors, we were able to maintain our budgets. And so we made it through the downturn and are now growing again, and serving veterans that's probably a bigger issue for us than the downturn was, the type of people that we're serving. That changed so much in the downturn.
I think it's trying to strategically look at what's coming. Back in 2008, we embarked on a capital campaign too. So I had to raise $6 million for that building, in addition to more services, in addition to less money. But I think Karae's right, communicating that out to people and out to the donors that this is really important and it's necessary. And I think the community, government, cities, everyone has realized that safety net services are very critical. So, and at the same time, strategizing how to keep expenses low. How can we utilize volunteers or a unique partnership? You just have to think all about that kind of planning all the time.
In our case, many of the local foundations really stepped up during that dark period and made a real impact for us, as well as the stimulus dollars in our case too, as the numbers grew.
I think we're actually more worried right now. Yeah. Because like several of you, when things were really dark, I think a lot of people said, well, maybe I'll cut back the arts, but I'm not going to cut back the food bank, or I'm not going to cut back these basic fundamental safety net kinds of things. We're still seeing demand go up, and yet I think there is a segment of the community, I would imagine, especially if you're well invested in the stock market, you're feeling pretty darn good right now. It feels like the bad times are over. But for so many of the people that all of us serve, the bad times are not over, and actually the need is increasing.
That's a great place to stop. I want to thank all of you for giving us all this time, and for all the work you do, and for joining us, and thank you for joining us. Join us next time on The Game.